Dr. Daniel Jolley!
So thank you so much for choosing the Psychology of Conspiracy Theories. My plan is to talk for 40 minutes, the plan, to then enable questions from the floor. So I'm Dr. Daniel Jolley, based at the University of Nottingham. Now, throughout this talk, I am going to embed this infographic that I had some artists draw a couple of years ago. Now, the infographic can be downloaded if you're watching online. I've also got some postcards that I've popped on the book stand. They're free. So if you are so inspired by my talk, I want to remember some of the key messages, you can. So keep that in mind. So with this talk, I want to think about, firstly, what is a conspiracy theory? Think about why do so many people find conspiracy theories really appealing? And also to think about, okay, what is the harm? Are they just harmless bits of fun? And also, as well, talk about how do we try and combat some of their negative effects towards the end. But that is the kind of the whirlwind of what we will discuss. So the very first question is, what is a conspiracy theory? Now, I'm sure each of you probably has your own ideas of what a conspiracy theory is. Indeed, scholars as well have many, many discussions of how you define a conspiracy theory. In particular, the philosophers really like to think about what this is. And of course, it's a really important thing. A definition that I do kind of go back to is one from 1979, which is attempts to explain the ultimate causes of events as secret plots by powerful forces rather than overt activities. Now, if I was editing this right now, and I could edit my infographic, I would edit it slightly. So here it says causes of events. But actually, it's quite broader than that. It's events or issues. It's big events or issues. It's things in our society by powerful forces. Now, often it actually is perceived powerful forces. So it's groups that we find threatening. And it's also in opposition to kind of the agreed consensus of our societal fabric. It's going against the consensus of authorities. So that authority could be scientists or the government or whatever it is, depending on what that issue is. So what you find is that every significant event has a conspiracy theory that goes alongside it. So we've obviously got a picture here of the moon landing. The idea that it was all a hoax didn't occur. We've also got theories around anti-vaccine, that again, they're dangerous, they're for profit. Climate change, that climate change is actually all a hoax. It's not actually caused by humans. And then I'm really sorry to mention the C word already, so soon into the talk, but COVID-19. COVID-19 has many different conspiracy theories associated. This graphic here talks about 5G, but of course, think about Bill Gates, pharma, governments, all a host of different things, from suggesting it's a hoax, didn't exist, or to the vaccines. But what you find, actually, is conspiracy theories can accuse many different groups that can be perceived to be powerful. So the examples I mentioned before were typically about the government or indeed pharma. But actually, these conspiracies or these events can promote a whole range of different conspiracy theories about different groups. So take the second bullet point here about climate change. People accuse scientists, communists, the UN, Democrats, the government, the oil industry. So actual facts that you've got this one event, or issue in this case, climate change, and you actually have a whole range of different potential conspirators of all different kind of textures, from the government all the way to different groups. So the point that I'm making there is that whilst we often think about conspiracy theories as the government, the powerful group doing shady things, actually conspiracy theories can have a very kind of important intergroup element where they can be about other people So Republicans about Democrats, Democrats about Republicans in the US, or indeed about Jewish people, or immigrants, or LGBT people. Actually, conspiracy theories can be quite widespread. So to try and push the point and get people to understand what makes a conspiracy theory, with some colleagues, we developed what we've called the Conspiracy Kitchen, which has what we think the three main ingredients of what makes a long-lasting conspiracy. So, of course, you first have the protagonist, the actor, who did it. You've then got an action. What did they do? You've then got a motive. Why did they do it? And then there's actually the intersection between these three ingredients that actually makes a conspiracy theory. So sometimes if I'm out doing a public engagement exhibit, I actually have a kitchen in front of me where I have different boxes with a whole range of different ingredients inside each box. But we also developed something for the website on the links at the bottom where we have these different ingredients. So I thought I would just do a demo here. It's going to give you a flavour of what makes a conspiracy theory. So the very first example, I have the protagonist being teenagers are, and the action is they are buying cryptocurrency, and the motive is in order to win the space race. Now, these three things here are ingredients. They are a protagonist, an action, and a motive, but they don't make sense in my mind. So we take the first one, teenagers are. Now, I don't perceive teenagers to be powerful. I'm sorry to say that, but I don't see teenagers as powerful. I also don't see teenagers being involved in cryptocurrency and in order to win the space race. It seems a bit of a weird mismatch. Maybe if the protagonist happened to be the US government are buying cryptocurrency in order to win the space race, I may lean into it slightly more. But here you can kind of see how whilst the ingredients are there, they just don't really kind of fit together. So another example I have is the British royal family are cancelling the TV show Love Island to confuse people. Again, it's got the ingredients, right? But it just doesn't make sense. So the protagonist, yes, British royal family, powerful group. You're like, yeah, conspirator. Cancelling the TV show Love Island to confuse people. It just doesn't kind of match together. Third go. British politicians are using Baby Yoda to take over the world. So the first one, politicians, yes, powerful group. Take over the world actually is a motive that actually kind of makes sense. So maybe if it wasn't Baby Yoda, it was involved in secret plots and schemes, or doing something sinister to take over the world, or trying to put things in vaccines to take over the world. That, I think, would kind of come together. So the very last example I have of this point is the British government is putting secret messages in movies to deceive the public. And that feels better. It's better than the teenage one. Here you've got your powerful group doing something for their own motive, their own sinister motive. And this, for us, is really highlighting what a conspiracy theory is. That it really needs to have these kind of three ingredients in this kind of perfect kind of recipe to make you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So if you think about the theories that you know of, I suspect they'll all fit into kind of these ingredients. And also of interest with this one, often, more always, conspiracy theories are quite sinister. They're always kind of engaged in bad plots and schemes. Like if this was the government secret messages to make the world a better place, you'd be like, that makes, why, what? But if, it was make it a better place to make more money for themselves, you'd be like, oh, that makes sense. So also the interest with the motive really kind of has to be that kind of sinister thing. So now, hopefully, we've kind of got a shared understanding of what a conspiracy theory is. Think about, okay, who believes in conspiracies? And in particular, starting with misconceptions. Now, probably like 15 years ago, maybe slightly more, there was the stereotype that those who believe in conspiracies wear tinfoil hats, They are paranoid on the out fringes of society, and we should just ignore what they say. Now, that was kind of the rhetoric for quite some time, until psychologists typically got interested and actually have uncovered a lot of more that shows more nuance in that. And actually, we sort of argue nowadays that we all have a little bit of conspiracy in each of us. And actually, some of the things I want to talk about today, I think, could be quite universal, in the sense that any of us could find ourselves down the road of a conspiracy belief. So whilst paranoia is a predictor of belief in conspiracy theories, not everyone who believes in conspiracy theories is paranoid. It's just some people are. So actually, there's a whole nuance of who believes in conspiracies. So that very question. The first thing is thinking, okay, is there any demographic differences of those who are more susceptible to believe in conspiracies? So a couple of years ago, me and some colleagues did the first study in the UK to look into young people's belief in conspiracy theories. Because before that, all the work was to do with adults. What do adults believe? But of course, teenagers don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the same world that we exist in. So we wanted to explore, do they actually believe in conspiracies? Do these beliefs seem to manifest in that age group? And as I'm sure you're probably not shocked to find that actually, yes, teenage years is a flourishing ground. Here you can see where we did one of the studies looking at age and belief in conspiracy theories. And what we seem to find is age 14 seems to be a time when conspiracy beliefs start to kind of uptick. And they seem to kind of go up a little bit more and then kind of stagger out. So for us, it's the question of, well, why? Why does that age group seem to be important? We're still looking into that, working out why. Some suggestions that we have is, so age 14, that's year 10 in the UK. And also, at that age, young people have been shown to feel more anxiety because their emotional regulation strategies have decreased. And what you find is that as the teenager develops towards age 16, their anxieties actually decrease because they engage more in emotional regulation. So is it just that some of their psychology, some of their needs, their anxieties are quite provoked at this age, which means that then when they're looking for answers, looking for meaning, they could become more drawn to a conspiracy theory. This age is when young people look towards their friends, their communities, rather than their family to help them inform their beliefs. And at least legally, at that age, you can get social media. At least legally. I suspect most people go slightly earlier, but legally it's 13 or so. So with social media, I certainly don't think that it's caused belief in conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories have existed since the start of time. I think a bit like the talks earlier, I think the internet has just put a spotlight on these beliefs, that people can be more easily exposed to different content. And that someone who may be already susceptible because are feeling anxious, looking for answers, looking towards the community, may find themselves digesting this content. But those are open questions. We know these beliefs circle in those age groups. We just need to understand why. There's also differences in minority group status. So, for example, HIV and AIDS conspiracy theories, the idea that HIV and AIDS were human-made, are more common amongst minority group members. And it was theorized that experiences of discrimination could explain why this is happening. So in the sense of, if people have had prior experience of being targeted, well, that could obviously impact how they see the world. Indeed, some early work back in 1999 highlighted in a sample of African Americans that victims of police harassment reported higher HIV conspiracy beliefs, i.e. the idea that it's human-made. So providing some initial evidence that life experience discrimination could be a precursor. Indeed, 2 years ago or so, we had some data with gay males in the UK, and we found that experiences of discrimination based on sexual orientation was also associated with heightened HIV conspiracy beliefs. And we also found that conspiracy beliefs were therefore associated with less favourable attitudes towards PrEP. So PrEP is a biomedical therapy used for those who are at heightened risk of HIV. So here, there's some data therefore demonstrating that one's experience of the world, in this case, your discrimination due to your race and or sexual orientation, may make a conspiracy seem much more appealing. And for me, I think that's super interesting, how one's life experience, where someone was the subject of discrimination and someone arguably was out to get them, impacts how they see the world. So when we think about interventions, which I'm slightly jumping the gun here, interventions, there's that interesting path where you need to think about someone's actual context and what they've been through to say, think more critically. They'll be like, well, yeah, I am, and look what's happened to me. So I think there's an interesting conversation around discrimination in particular and conspiracy beliefs. But with this, it kind of got me thinking about what else could impact someone's, in essence, life story. And I did some work looking into bullying and belief in conspiracy theories. So with discrimination, it's very much based on the intergroup. You'll be discriminated against because of your sexuality, your race. Whereas with bullying, it's a little bit different. Often it's interpersonal, and it's not necessarily always linked to those characteristics. There's sometimes a power imbalance between the victim and the bully, and it can be in work or school, and there'll be a whole host of different contexts. In our work, we looked at the role of workplace bullying. And what we did was, with a sample of people who were employed in the UK, we asked them a series of questions about behaviours that are bullied-related. And then we also asked them their belief in conspiracy theories. In addition, we also said to them, here's a definition of bullying. Over the last 6 months, have you been bullied in the workplace? And what we found was that individuals who reported more bullied behaviours, so people gossiping, people withholding information, etc., reported heightened belief in conspiracies. And also those individuals who said, yes, I have been bullied in the last 6 months, had a higher belief in conspiracy theories. So again, for me, this highlights how actually any of us could find ourselves in that situation, whereby we are seeking answers to explain what is happening to us. As I say, any of us could find ourselves tomorrow over a period of time to be bullied. So actual fact, to the assertions at the start on the previous research suggests that people who believe in conspiracies are on the fringes and are just paranoid individuals, I don't think is accurate, whereby the research today is highlighting how actually it could also be any of us. And indeed, in any of us in another way, because conspiracy theories accompany every significant event. So obviously we've got a breaking news story where you can see a range of different events. So hopefully this shows, but it's a bad day, it will happen at the same time. But the middle one is about Princess Diana dies in a Paris accident. You've then also got reports say a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. And I'm sorry to bring Boris into this, and to remind you of this, but that's Boris's speech when he was announcing the lockdown in 2020. So all three are large, significant events that arguably we've all been through, whereby when we learn about these events, it also makes us feel in a certain way. Often it's feelings of, I'm sure you're thinking about them now, feelings of anxiety. You wondered what's happened. What's going on here? You feel uncertain, which are some of the reasons why conspiracy theories are appealing. Because we all of us, want to feel, certain. We want to be in control. We want to have low levels of threat. But those examples that I mentioned, in that moment, what we call a crisis, these needs that we have are frustrated. So we feel disempowered. We feel uncertain and we feel threatened. So actually, when we hear about Diana dying or there's a virus outbreak, we suddenly go into a sense-making process where we're trying to make sense of what is happening. So actually, believing in a conspiracy theory can often provide a simple-ish explanation for what is a large, significant, anxiety-provoking event. So in that moment of crisis, it promises to make you feel better. And of course, these events impact these needs, but so does experiences of discrimination. So we know, for example, being discriminated against makes you feel more anxious, makes you feel more threatened. So actually, the journey to how someone finds themselves in a conspiracy rabbit hole could be quite varied. Indeed, you can imagine if someone has been bullied, they feel anxious, they then read the news about the virus outbreak, that can make them even more anxious, and of course, find that conspiracy even more appealing. So indeed, it could be us dealing with some of our kind of needs that we all have. But there's also other concepts. So borrowing from cognitive psychology, which is more to do with how our brain works, there's this bias called proportionality bias. It's the assumption that big events must be explained by something equally as big. So if I were to win the lottery today, or meet the love of my life, I may explain that as it's written in the stars. It's fate. It's not just, oh, it's happened. And the same thing seems to happen with conspiratorial beliefs. That when you hear about a big event, so the examples here, I've got Diana or 9/11 or whatever it is, you automatically assume that something equally as big must have happened. So it must be a government conspiracy. It can't just be a simple car accident that has killed the princess. And that's a bias that we all seem to have kind of ticking in our mind that goes, yes, this is what has occurred. I always find it quite interesting how we think about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, and how at the time there was a couple of conspiracies around the Pope being involved, but they never had any traction because he survived. It was the attempted assassination. So you then wonder, if he did die, would there be conspiracy theories about his death? And I would say, yes, they would. That we will be talking about them today. So actually, that's kind of an interesting example of this kind of bias in action. That, again, you can think about that with the psychology of the needs. If you feel anxious, and in that moment your brain's going, oh, it must be something equally as big, well, that could bias your thinking when you digest information that explains what has happened to that event, that princess, that whatever it is. So something else, I'm going to get you to do something. No shouting out, don't worry, you can just stay in your own heads. But with this, the researchers had some participants come into the lab. And they said, we're going to show you a series of coin tosses. And we want you to answer this question. And the question was, are the coin tosses random or completely determined? And they had them answer this question on what we call a Likert scale, from a 1 to a 7. So a 1 is if you believe that the answer, if you believe it's completely random. Or a 7 is if you believe it's completely determined. So they said, watch these coin tosses and then put an answer from 1 to 7. So if I was thinking, yeah, they're pretty determined, I might give a 6 or a 7. If I'm like, no, they are random, I might do a 1 or a 2. So I'm going to show you these coin tosses. I want you to think in your own mind, what number would you put between a 1 and a 7? So here's the first coin toss, the second, and here's some more. In actual fact, they saw quite a few. So I want you to think, what number would you give from completely random, a 1, to a 7? So after they did this task, as you've done, they then were asked to complete a series of questions about their belief in conspiracy theories. And what they found was that individuals who are more likely to say that these are completely determined are more likely to indicate a higher belief in conspiracy theories. A second study had some other participants, another group of participants come in, and they said, we're going to show you some paintings. And we want you to answer the question, to what extent do you see a painting, do you see a pattern in these paintings? Again, it was if you see random strokes of paint, put a 1, and if you clearly see a pattern, put a 7. So again, in your own mind, think about what you would put between a 1 and a 7. So here's the first painting. And then here's the second painting. So again, after they did this task, with a few more paintings, it wasn't just two, and then asked them their belief in conspiracy theories. And what they found was that individuals who were more likely to see a pattern, putting more of a 6, 6, or 7, were more likely to report a higher belief in conspiracy theories, which I think is interesting. So with these paintings, they were by Pollock. Now, nodding the heads, good. I didn't know who Pollock was, so I had to go to Google. So, as you did. So I'm glad someone else did know, but that's on me. So on Google, Pollock was famous for making these paintings during his pour period. So he literally just poured paint onto the canvas. So they're kind of getting to as random as possible. And so what you get here is that people who have a tendency to see patterns are more likely to potentially believe in conspiracy theories. So these could be patterns like these experiments here. It could be patterns in clouds. It could be patterns in information, where you potentially are digesting content and maybe see a pattern that arguably is not there. A bit like some of the examples I showed a moment ago. So here, I think it's interesting to see the connection between these different facets. That someone who's susceptible to see patterns may be more likely to be drawn down a conspiratorial route, but I suspect that there's confounds in the sense that if that person feels anxious, if they indeed have experiences of discrimination for whatever reason, all this coming together can make that person slightly more susceptible. Now, actually, there isn't necessarily a profile of who believes in conspiracy theories. I think actually the journey is very unique depending on that person's circumstance. But it's interesting to think about how all these different things can come together and potentially be quite appealing for someone in that crisis. But that's important. They are appealing, but they are not satisfying. That would be fantastic if you're able to believe in this conspiracy and then to feel better about the world, and that makes everything all rosy. That is unfortunately not the case. Interesting research has found that individuals who felt anxious are more drawn to a conspiracy theory, then over time, their anxieties actually sometimes increase or stay the same. Whereas you would imagine if they're appealing and satisfying, you would believe that the government is conspiring, you then feel better about the world. But you actually don't. You actually feel, if anything, slightly worse. Which I think sort of makes sense. Because if you come into this world and you believe that there's hidden plots and schemes all around, that actually makes you feel more distrusting. It can actually erode your trust in our institutions, which can also, has been shown to erode trust in other people. It therefore makes you feel more anxious. You think, well, what else are they doing? It's also been shown how people who believe in one conspiracy are very likely to believe in multiple others, because they kind of all hang around the same belief structure. That if you are distrusting of the government and you believe people are doing shady things, well, then it's quite easy to kind of believe in anti-vaccine conspiracies and climate change and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So work actually shows that they're appealing, but they actually don't make you feel any better, which is sort of a shame, because it would be quite good if they did, but they don't. Which actually means that conspiracy theories can influence citizens, us, and our society in which we live in very significant ways. Both for the individual, so as in you feel more anxiety, you feel more distrusting, but also how you behave in society. So some maybe early work that I did looked into anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. And looking at parents, we found that parents who had a heightened belief in conspiracies were more likely to report a less intention to vaccinate a fictional child. And also, one of the first experiments, we looked at the role of being exposed to this content. And again, we found that people who are exposed to conspiracy theories about vaccines reported a lower intention to want to get vaccinated. Now, over COVID, because of course COVID-19 had lots of conspiracies about vaccines, there was a lot of attention on conspiracy beliefs and vaccine behaviours to do with COVID-19. Now, this study here was a meta-analysis, which basically means it pulls all the data together from all the research that was conducted and looks for patterns. So here, they looked at 53 studies with over 78,000 people. And what they found was that there's a reliable relationship between COVID-19 conspiracy theories, beliefs, and a range of different behaviours to do with COVID. So it could be whether the person is going to get vaccinated. It's also interesting to note, that the bottom sentence, that they argue that actually the effects are small, which I thought makes sense, that there's a whole range of different reasons why someone may not get vaccinated. But they argue that at a large scale, like we've seen in the pandemic, these beliefs can be a threat to public health. So again, there's some interesting evidence highlighting these links. Another important topic is to do with climate change conspiracy theories. So again, some early work I did highlighted how exposure to climate change conspiracy theories can reduce one's intention to want to reduce your carbon footprint. Now, for me, this highlights how it could impact us all and not just the believers. If someone's not reducing the carbon footprint, that's going to impact both me and also you. Of interest, I looked at a paper recently looking at a lot of meta-analysis. This time they had 22 studies with over 20,000 people. Again, found that the relationship across experiments and also correlation is robust. That people who do believe in these conspiracies, it impacts how they think about climate change, impacts how they support policies to do with climate change, and also a range of different behaviours. So here, again, more evidence of how these beliefs can potentially have a real-world impact around issues that are, of course, important to our society. But it can also impact how we enact in society. So it's been found by some researchers that exposure to conspiracy theories can reduce normative actions. So what they mean by that is that it reduces intentions to vaccinate and to engage in legal demonstration. With the voting, it kind of makes sense. If you believe the government is all plots and schemes, why would you want to vote for that party? So it can actually, decrease these behaviours. But it's been shown to increase non-normative behaviours. So these are things such as refusing to pay taxes and committing violence against people in power. Now, I've kind of underlined, italicized the word power, because as I mentioned right at the start, sometimes you assume that people in person in power is the government. But of course, there are many conspiracies about minority group members, Jewish people, immigrants, etc., where there's countless examples of those groups of people being the subject of violence and extremism because of these beliefs. So I won't mention too much about it now, but there's emerging literature highlighting how these links are certainly robust. So when you think about violence against a person in power, you're not thinking of your MP, you're thinking of someone in the community, actually, who's been targeted because of these conspiracies. And indeed, I think it's really important that we do put a spotlight on those who are the targets of conspiracy theories. Often my work in particular has focused on the consequences of the believer, on their behaviours and how they impact other people's behaviours. But I think it's really important also to turn the attention to the impact of intergroup conspiracies. So what we found, for example, in this research, is that conspiracy theories can increase prejudice, negativity towards the perceived conspirators. So in this case, it was Jewish people, but could be a whole range of different groups. It can also increase discrimination against that group. Of interest as well, we actually demonstrated that there can be a generalizable effect as well. What we mean by that is if people were exposed to the idea that Jewish people are involved in plots and schemes, it makes them feel more negative towards Jewish people, but that then also relates to them feeling more negative towards other people as well. It kind of generalizes out to a whole range of different groups. So actually, it's not just voting or vaccination or climate change, it's also linked with how you see and interact with other people. As I say, still with the notion of trying to look into intergroup conspiracies, I was keen just recently, so this work here is under review currently. What I mean by that is that it's not yet published. It's with the reviewers who actually have put comments back, and I'm due to resubmit shortly, but this is kind of in-prep work. But what we found was that, conspiracy theories are spread widely online, which means that the groups who are the target probably see these conspiracy theories about their group, and those reading about them, being aware that these conspiracies exist, could impact them as well. So indeed what we found was that the perceived popularity of conspiracy beliefs about your group was shown to make you feel more threatened, was shown for you to have emotional reactions, so you feel more anxious, and for you to actually have a behavioural response. So to want to avoid contact with those who are not part of your group, who you believe are endorsing conspiracy theories. So the way we tested this with the behaviour in a study with Jewish participants who are from the US, we told them at the start that you may be asked to have an interaction with someone else during the study. At that point, about halfway through, we said, no, it's time for you to interact with someone during the study. You are assigned randomly, blah, 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 but here's some information about that person. Now, the age and the gender was copied from the participant, so it was identical to who and whatever they were, so, 19, male, whatever. The location was US, because that's where they are based, but the important thing here is the religion. So this is the religion of Christian. So they are an out-group member who would perceive to believe in these conspiracies. And what we found was that people who thought that, yes, these conspiracies are actually quite widespread, were more likely to say, I want to select a new partner. I don't want to chat with this person. So here it kind of gave some behavioural evidence of actually someone disengaging from society, or rather pulling back because of these conspiracies. Which therefore leads to the question, or one of the statements, shall I say, that interventions to target the consequences of conspiracy theories are timely. So whether it's the consequences in the sense of climate change, or whether it's the consequences of how that target group, whether it is a Jewish person or immigrant, or indeed someone who's working in the NHS, who's been shouted at because they say you're part of the cover-up with COVID, it's how that group is impacted. So a proactive approach we've tested is around inoculation. So it's the idea that if you give people factual content up front, it can offer some reluctance to them being drawn into a conspiracy theory if they're exposed to it. And indeed, we found, in the context of anti-vaccine conspiracies, that if someone receives scientific facts up front, they are more likely to have an increased intention to want to vaccinate. So it seemed to be that giving people these facts did offer some resolution. But I'm critical of my own research in the sense that often the kind of consensus around that issue, around the vaccine, whatever it is, takes a little bit of time for the scientists or whoever it is to do their work, which means that a conspiracy account can exist before there's actually real scientific evidence. It could be just questions before we know what the actual answer is. So instead, inoculation may only work in certain circumstances. So for example, you could imagine that a new parent who's thinking about vaccinating their kids, that could be an ideal time to have these conversations. So instead, there's probably other suggestions that kind of work and reduce conspiracy beliefs. One idea is around promoting analytical, critical thinking abilities, has been shown to reduce belief in conspiracies. So for me, this is very much showcasing or teaching how to spot shoddy evidence. Also, inducing feelings of control can reduce belief in conspiracies. So it can be around, therefore, addressing some of the needs that people have so they feel able to actually evaluate information before they find themselves down the rabbit hole. And also of interest, correcting social norms. People who believe in conspiracies misrepresent how many people believe in conspiracy theories. They overestimate and they say many people believe. Whilst many do people believe, they overestimate above and beyond. So by correcting that misperception, that actually can reduce belief in conspiracies. Also, some recent work that had published in July looked at the role of intergroup contact. And what we found was that if people have positive experiences with those from diverse groups, such as in here it was Jewish people or immigrants, this can actually reduce people's belief in conspiracies. So it's interesting to try and learn about why that is and have some ideas, but nonetheless, you can kind of demonstrate how having these positive encounters can have a real positive effect on how you perceive that group, which then, of course, has implications of how we think about how our spaces are set up and how, if we bring people into contact, this could actually be a really positive thing. Now, I thought I would end just by thinking about conversations that people have with those who believe in conspiracies. So we thought about how could a conversation look, with the preference that it's difficult and they're hard, but what could help those conversations? And what we think actually is, rather than addressing or talking about one's conspiracy belief, rather you have much more of a positive conversation around it. So what I mean by that is, firstly, be open-minded. Now, I don't say that, tell me about your flat earth conspiracy theory. It's rather, when did you start believing in that conspiracy? Like, what was happening then? Like, how does this make you feel? In essence, try to understand a bit about someone's journey to that belief. Not about the belief, but what kind of led them to it. And then, therefore, be receptive. So when they start talking about what was happening a year ago, whatever it was, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. Why was that the case? Kind of have those conversations. Critical thinking. So I'm sure everyone can agree that being a critical thinker is an important thing, both sides of the coin. But what we find is that people who are more susceptible to believe in conspiracies actually think they are being a critical thinker, subjectively, but objectively they are not. So rather it could be discussions around, okay, when you search something, like you go on Google, whatever, how do you evaluate that information? What do you look for? And get a conversation going around the skill sets that I'm sure you both agree on. Highlight how conspiracy theories aren't the norm. So in the sense of, you have this belief, or actual fact, that, whilst it may feel like everyone believes in these conspiracies, because you have this misperception, actually that isn't true. Most people don't believe in these things. Most people are vaccinating, are reducing the carbon footprint. And then think about what can be controlled. So as I mentioned, conspiracy theories can be drawn out when someone feels a lack of control. So if you can think about, there are many things in our lives that we have no control over, but there are things that actually we do have control over. Let's chat about those things. So these are just suggestions of how the conversation can be around more supportive, building rapport, rather than saying your conspiracy theory is wrong and I'm right. Rather, it's okay, let's understand where we're both coming from to hopefully enable someone to move into a better place, that when they do find themselves evaluating information again, they're hopefully a little more aware of how to kind of get to that same information, how to evaluate that same piece of information. So some take-home messages is hopefully I've highlighted how conspiracy theories are a product of kind of normal, everyday processes. That yes, paranoia is associated, but actually any of us could find a conspiracy theory appealing in the right environment. And they can actually be quite potentially harmful, impacting our behaviours and also how we see other people. But there is current work and still ongoing work into how we can try and combat some of the negative impact of conspiratorial beliefs. As I mentioned, if you were so inspired by things I've said, there's my infographic, which is at the bookstand free. Feel free to grab one if you want to have a keepsake. But I have left about 7 minutes for questions. Thank you very much.